Greetings and welcome to the Comics Coffee and Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardenas, and today I have a returning guest and someone I've been wanting to have back on for quite a while. And he's back to talk about, some really cool new books he's been doing and hopefully not be too angry with me on my experience with some of his recommendations from before. But regardless of all that, I'm very pleased to have back on the show, Scott Bryan Wilson. Scott, thank you so much for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
So yeah, like I said before, you're back on the show. Last time we were talking about True Cult and all that, but you've had some other stuff come out. You got some cool stuff happening with your book Killmore, and you sent me some one shots that you did, especially one called 3 Days to Death Is Here, which I really dug. I thought that was a really cool one shot, and all the kinds of cool stuff going on. So, but before we get into that, we got to do the show title, Comics Coffee Metal. What are you digging right now?
This is an old fashioned. That's what I'm digging right now.
A nice old fashioned. If I recall correctly, you weren't too much into coffee, but you were talking last time you were talking about we're reminiscing about soda, and you brought up a soda called Zevia, which I went to go try, and that's where I really learned that the stevia sweetener and I are not compatible.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, I'm not compatible with it either, because I ended up in the hospital with a kidney stone.
Oh boy!
And it turned out it was the stevia, the just ungodly amount of it I had been drinking. Made a little stone. So me and Zevia said goodbye after that, and I just went back to Diet Dr. Pepper. So
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that your experience ended up being a lot worse than mine. Mine doesn't seem so funny anymore.
And Diet Dr. Pepper's fucking cheaper than Zevia anyway, so it's all good.
Yeah. Well, I went and I tried, and I had high hopes because I'm like, let me go try this. I'm always down to try something, and first and foremost, the taste of it, I was just like, oh man, this is not good. And I felt bad because I really wanted to say, hey, Scott, man, I loved it. Thanks for the recommendation. And I was like, oh my God, no. And then I hate wasting anything, but like I tried, I think 3 cans of it. And I just wasn't like a fan of it. And I'm like, man, this sucks. I even tried it different ways. I tried it like, I mixed it with some regular seltzer water. I put it in I just like, I was trying to make it work. And then I was like, oh man, this is just not great. And then I later, over this past Christmas, I got my wife one of those, the mini Keurigs or whatever for a quick thing. And we're trying out some, I like a chai tea latte or whatever. So I was trying out like one of those cups, and I'm like, I drink it and I'm like, it starts to taste fine, but then it's like, there's just something weird about the aftertaste and just not really digging it. And I had a couple days in a row and wasn't treating my body well. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. And I'm like, what is going on? And then I looked at the package and it said sweetened with stevia. And I'm like,
yeah, maybe that's the culprit.
And, it's some of those artificial sweeteners for me, like the aspartame or whatever in like regular diet Coke or whatever, diet soda stuff I've never really had an issue with it. But like sorbitol and like the stevia stuff, like, man, it wreaks havoc with my stomach if I'm not paying attention.
It's an acquired taste, I think, for sure. But then just for some people, it just doesn't get acquired.
Yeah. It's good. It's out there for some people, but for me, I was just like, no thanks. So, but it is kind of funny to me now that you bring up my other soda arch nemesis, and that is Dr. Pepper.
Oh yeah.
As a mature adult, or an attempt to be a mature adult, I can say that it's not necessarily I think it tastes bad or whatever. But growing up as a kid, I loved root beer. Yeah. And whenever we would go somewhere and I would ask for root beer, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have root beer. We got Dr. Pepper."
Yeah.
And I'm like, Dr. Pepper's not fucking root beer. It is not even the same.
Yeah.
And I just developed a very I'm not a super big fan of it, but like uh my 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 dislike for Dr. Pepper would definitely became irrational at that point, because it
Yeah,
was like a
I
almost like a
get it.
running joke
Yeah, I
that,
get it.
even when we went to like friends families houses for parties or whatever, and ask, we'd see what sodas they got, like, oh, we got Dr. Pepper, and I'm like, fucking Dr. Pepper, Jesus Christ. Like, and it's also a thing, like, the people, it's funny because the people I know that like love Dr. Pepper, fucking they love Dr. Pepper, like
Uh,
that's their jam. It's like a Diet Coke thing with some of these people, and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't see it. I don't
yeah,
get it. But you know what? I'm glad you're drinking something that's not going to put you back in hospital. Hopefully.
yeah. I mean, it may put me back in the hospital, but
Yeah.
what am I
Yeah.
going to do? Not drink soda? Not an
Yeah.
option. So
Yeah. Last time you recommended some really interesting music. It was kind of like a droney, staticky type of thing. And
mm-hmm.
at first listen, I was like, I don't know if I can get into this, but I did give it, the good old college try, and I ended up really liking it. And I haven't gone back to it in a while, but I did go back to it a few times just to kind of
Yeah,
have kind of
yeah,
like as like kind of almost like a white or brown noise
yeah.
in my head while I
Yeah,
did stuff. And that was really so that was
yeah. That was
recommendation. I was like,
Werewolf
all right,
Jerusalem.
this is good
Yeah,
stuff. This is good stuff.
yeah.
But how about now? What you've been listening to now?
Man, same sort of zone, noise, drone. Um, you know, pretty much if it has recognizable instruments, I'm not interested in it. A lot of just sound. This new, where is it? Let's see. This is super good. This just got reissued. This is the well, there's nothing on the cover, but it's a Skin Crime CD, self-titled. It was a tape that came out in '97. It's just been reissued on CD, and it's real fucking gnarly. So it's for me it for me like metal stopped being like heavy enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even like the most aggressive stuff just stopped being heavy enough, and then sort of progressed to listening to basically just straight harsh noise, and that is like to me like okay, okay, okay,
Yeah.
here we go.
It's
So
as you get into like heavier and heavier metal, and like the more almost like dissonant everything becomes, I see the transition from like, because
yeah,
if you started off from a point, being into that kind of stuff way sooner than other people, like
hmm
as you progress as
yeah,
a person or whatever listening to things, yeah, I totally see the chain through for that. For me, for myself, I'm just, within the early couple years of dipping my toes into death metal and some black
yeah,
metal
yeah, yeah,
stuff, or, whatever they want to call deathcore, whatever it is, man, whatever it is,
yeah, yeah,
I just,
yeah,
you know, kind of the opposite of you a little bit, where you're like, if it has discernible instruments, no thanks. For me, like I just, I love a good riff. I love a good
yeah, yeah, yeah,
drum groove. I love
yeah,
some good audible heavy bass,
yeah.
not bass, but
I
like
mean,
bass guitar bass.
no, I know. I love all that shit too. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love all that shit
Yeah,
too. I don't. It's not a focal point of my listening
yeah.
for the past couple years, for the most
Oh
part.
no,
But
yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is just for me. Like that's kind of the like I'll forgive a lot if like any
mm-hmm,
one or two of those things is really good,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
yeah,
an
yeah, for
album.
sure.
I'll
Yeah,
forgive a lot still.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but but yeah, I see how it progresses and all that, because even now, like whenever I'm checking out like a new death metal band or something like that, I'm finding myself like listening, and I'm like, this sounds too produced, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm,
wait a second.
mm-hmm,
Like, I listen
mm-hmm,
to some of the most produced shit in the world. Like
mm-hmm.
if you listen
Yeah,
to
yeah,
like
yeah. Uh huh.
any like modern, like I'll again, these are genres that I'm just what people call them, but like symphonic deathcore, like you have like production
Yeah.
elements for like almost like a movie happening, and
Oh
sound
yeah,
effects and
yeah.
things,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's great and it's awesome. But it's also like I'm also like stepping back, like who the fuck am I? Like it's too produced. Like what are you
Yeah, yeah,
talking
yeah.
about?
Exactly.
But then
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like I'm just realizing that like I'm. my ear for that dissonance is growing and that and
Uh-huh.
all that. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so I'm eager to check out some more things to kind of broaden that horizon a bit
Yeah,
more.
yeah. Hell yeah.
Cool. I'm in my if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, you're not going to see this, but uh, if you go over to YouTube and you'll see the video version, Scott's got like a killer looking tape collection right behind him of all these cassette tapes and all that. Um, is
Yeah,
that
I mean,
something? Is that like a holdover from the old days and stuff like that, or is it something more recent? Because
um,
just because I've
most of my
known people, yeah, who have gotten
most of my
tapes recently.
tapes, yeah, most of my tapes are from the past. I would say 6 or 7 years. I purchased most of the tapes. Vinyl's always been like my format since I was a kid.
Mhm.
It was always just vinyl, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and then um, CD is probably my favorite format now because it's inexpensive. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it fucking sounds great, right?
Hmm.
Like what you can't see is like just CD stacks of CDs just everywhere on the just stacked up, no order. They're kind of roughly by genre, but that's basically it. Um, but then there's vinyl in front of me. You can't see there's vinyl everywhere, and then there's tapes like all over the place. Um, Tape's probably my least favorite format, but a lot of stuff I like is only available on tape, so I kind of just deal with it. Um, but yeah, I have a component stereo here in my office. Um, CD 6 disc CD changer, um, tape deck, turntable. Um, I don't really listen to anything digitally unless it's only available digitally, and I'll maybe check it out. But for the most part, everything I listen to, I buy on physical format, and I try to buy either from the band or from the label. So
Mhm.
that's just sort of try to support in that way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Have you ever like thought about like getting like one of those converters to like move your tapes to at least a digital format just so you can like burn a CD of it?
Well, there's luckily a
Or I
lot
guess
of
you could if you had the stereo
tapes.
setup. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Luckily, a lot of new tapes come with digital download. Like if you buy it through
Okay.
Bandcamp or buy it from the label, they'll send you digital download. Um, a lot of times with things that are, um, if it's only released digitally, I'll often buy it digitally and just burn it to CD and then listen to it on CD.
Hmm.
Um, because my speakers sound better than my computer speakers, my monitor speakers.
Yeah.
Um, I'll do that, but yeah, part of my sort of ritual is like every day sort of pulling out what I'm going to listen to for the day. And sometimes I'll go two or
Hmm.
3 days with the same sort of little rotation of stuff, especially if it's new stuff and I want to kind
Yeah.
of listen to everything 3 or 4 times before I shelve it. Like I just got yesterday, these, uh, I just got these Jim Kirkwood CDs. They're reissues of
Oh.
his tapes from the '90s. This is like totally fucking obscure, like Dungeon Synth before Dungeon Synth
Oh, okay.
existed, right? So
Okay.
like,
I've listened to some Dungeon Synth before. I really liked it, actually.
yeah. So most of like you can't really see it, but I probably have 400 Dungeon Synth tapes and tons of
Oh,
vinyl
okay.
and CDs. So I mean,
Nice.
that's another genre I'm interested in. Um, but the Kirkwood stuff, man, is super cool. Like he was just making this shit to like, you know, no audience whatsoever, and just making a lot of it, which is super
Hmm.
inspiring to me as somebody who writes comics to almost no audience. Um, so
That's
it's super inspiring, and then to see it coming out, 30 years later on CD tape and vinyl reissues, it's just it's kind of amazing. But the CDs just they fucking sound great. Um,
mhm.
Out of Season put those out. That's a label out of Maine. Um, and so those have been in the player. Those will probably be in the player for 3 or 4 days before I sort of cycle them out for a little bit. But it's super super good stuff if you're into like fantasy music at all, right? Like it was all directly inspired by Tolkien, you know,
Mhm.
um, and he was just making the music because that was what he was into, and he was sort of making these soundtracks, and they're they're super good. They're kind of gloomy and dark, but also kind of triumphant. It's
Yeah,
amazing stuff. Yeah, really good stuff.
yeah. It's I forget who like introduced me to Dungeon Synth. I know someone, it was someone on Twitter. I don't want to misname anybody, but yeah, that was definitely something that once you've brought it up again, I'm like, oh man, I haven't listened to any of that in a while. But that was some really good stuff. It's just like you said, it's like it's got this like fantasy aspect, but it's also,
Yeah,
you know, dark. You know, it's got that
yeah,
foreboding to it.
yeah. The
Um,
the darker stuff is definitely more interesting to me. But there's some really good there's some really good stuff out there. If you ever want any recommendations, I can send you a list to
oh,
check out. It's
one hundred
really
percent.
really good stuff. Yeah,
You know, it's very likely my youngest is going into full-time kindergarten this fall, which means I will be getting like an extra 4+ hours out of my day to
yeah,
work
hell
during the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
Which also means I'm going to need to have some shit playing in my ears.
yeah, yeah. That's how it goes,
um,
man. As soon as you wake up, turn it on, and don't turn it off till you go to bed. You know.
yeah. So, yeah. So I'm definitely going to be hitting you up for some recommendations to get some of that going, because
Yeah, hell yeah,
also, you know, I find I like to listen to certain types of music during certain types of the year, almost,
yeah, hmm
because I find like um in spring and fall, like I'm really drawn to like synth stuff, either synth wave,
yeah, yeah,
synth
yeah.
pop,
hmm
synth, you know, dungeons, whatever. And there's just something about that changing of the season, and like the
Yeah,
evenings being like cooler than you know, colder than
hmm
everything else, but still like fresh almost.
yeah, yeah.
You
No,
know,
I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah, for
something
sure.
about that
Makes
just
sense.
pairs with that vibe so well. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's I'm looking forward to jumping back into some of that. So yeah, I'll definitely hit you that. And also that's Kirkwood stuff, I'm gonna go check that out. Is that on Bandcamp? Did he put the to get the CDs and stuff, or is it
I
just
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 got
regular
it from the label. It's like
label?
outofseasonlabel.com. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a sick label. I have like, I don't know, 100 of their releases, you know. They
Okay.
do some really, really good. It's very well curated, right? Like it's one of those labels where it's like, I mean, obviously they put out some things that I didn't like, but like for the most part, it's
Yeah.
really well curated. And you're like, 90% success rate. You can blind buy it. And you're like, oh, this is sick, you know. So, yeah,
That's awesome. That's awesome.
yeah.
So you know, what about comics? What comics have you been reading lately that's kind of been you know, inspiring you or just enjoying in general?
Man, what have I been reading? So I'm right now. I'm reading this manga called PTSD Radio. I don't know if you've read it. It's a horror manga. It's very strange. It's long. It's 2 volumes. It's probably 600, 800 pages total. And it's all these like 3, 4 page bursts that sometimes tie in together. Um, doesn't really create a cohesive storyline, but the whole thing's very unsettling. Um, really interesting. Was recommended to me by Sam Johns, who's a writer on House of Slaughter. They recommended it to me. Good recommendation, good book. Um, Digging that. I just read the last issue of the Enfield Gang Massacre tonight, which my buddy Chris Condon is writing with art by Jake Phillips. Super good. Um, I've been digging that. Um, yeah, the new Brubaker Phillips graphic novel, where the body was, super
Okay.
good. They're known for their crime stuff, and it's like you read this,
Mhm.
and it's like not even really crime. It's just sort of a drama, but it's like um, it's like it's just they're like so um, they work so well together, and their body of work is really immense, and um, that's super that's super inspirational too. Yeah. So
Awesome. Awesome.
I don't know, man. I mean, I read comics all the time, but those are three recent ones that I dug. I'm sure there's something I'm gonna be kicking myself for not remembering, but those are three.
That's
Oh, this
that's how, yeah.
what's that?
That's how it goes, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
just
No, the only other thing I was going to mention is a manga called Blood on the Tracks. Um, that is like, I think it's about 15 volumes deep at this point. It is like super fucking gloomy, bleak uh, story about this boy and his relationship with his mother. Um, and man, it is so fucking grim and dark, and just nothing like it in American comics at all. You know, but really, really moving, beautiful, terrifying work. So I've been digging that too.
awesome. Well, you were so kind enough to send over a whole bunch of PDFs of stuff you've been working on, including, Killmore, 3 Days to Death is Here, Left Hand Path, a couple one shots you did with Death Sky Publishing, and I loved True Cult, thought it was awesome. I
Thanks,
was
dude.
really happy to see, some of the stuff for opportunities that came for you after that, like
Mm-hmm.
working on Pennyworth and
Mm-hmm.
a few other one shots and other stuff here and there. Is the one shot format something for you that you're still kind of like enamored with? Because it's something I haven't really done yet, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something that really intrigues me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done shorts and I've done longer stories,
Mm-hmm.
but like that's it feels like a sweet spot that like
Mm-hmm.
maybe that would be really really fun to explore. Is it so I have to ask, is it something that's is there still like a novelty to it for you? I guess novelty kind of trivializes
Yeah,
it a little.
yeah.
What I mean? Is it
No,
still
no,
like exciting?
no, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I love one shots. I love the format. I think, um, the there's a couple of reasons. I mean, from an artistic perspective, creative perspective, really forces you to distill the story down and really focus on telling the story in the tightest way possible,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't have any room for fooling around. You don't have room for like jokes. I mean, you have room for jokes, but like, you could have 2 pages. If you have a 4 issue miniseries, you can waste, quote unquote, waste 2 pages just for something funny that you want to have happen that doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily affect the plot, right? But in a
Yeah.
22-page one shot, 20-page one shot, 24 pages, whatever, you don't necessarily have that luxury, right? So everything has really got to do a lot of work for you. Um, so from a creative perspective, I really, um, I really like it. From a practical perspective, I also really like it because it's not a huge commitment. It's a lot
Hmm.
easier to get 24 pages out of an artist than 88, right?
Yeah.
So, it's a lot easier to, um, get that amount of work, but it's also easier to convince an artist that this is worth their time to do, right? When it's something shorter, it's not as much of a commitment, right? They can do it between other jobs or a
Hmm.
page here and there, and it's eventually done. Um, so I like it from that perspective. From a business perspective, they're fucking great too, because when you're tabling somewhere, right? Okay, so New York Comic Con this year, right? Um, Liana Kangas, who's my co-creator on True Cult, um, was tabling in Artist Alley, and I basically, after I got all my business for the weekend out of the way, I was free basically on Saturday and Sunday, and I hung out with them at the table, and we sold something like 55 copies of the True Cult trade over the weekend in New York Comic Con, right? Which is
Yeah.
sensational, right?
Yeah.
Like,
That's nuts.
nobody's gonna be mad about it. It's like 55 copies of a single book at
No.
New York Comic Con, right? Or any show, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Really.
what I realized is it's fucking easier to sell someone a $20 trade paperback that's the entire story than it is to sell them a $5 issue one of something that's unfinished or something where they've got to buy more issues.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about a one shot is that you can sell it for $5 or $6 and it's the whole story. So now you have a lower priced item too. right?
Yeah.
Maybe they don't want to drop $20 on True Cult or whatever. They don't have $20 or whatever, but $5. This is the whole story.
Yeah.
So
There
from
you
like a
go.
business economic perspective, it's really cool that way too. Also a lot easier to get people to read it. Not as much of a commitment. Hey, it's 32 pages, right? You can read it in one sitting and you're good, So there's a lot to be said for them, I think. Um, you know, um, as a format, and I really like the format a lot. I'm really happy that Dead Sky picked up the Left Hand Path, because Ken Knudsen, who's the artist on that book, he and I made that book over the course of a couple of years. Um, we were just doing it for ourselves. We didn't really know what we were going to do with it. And I had decided that I was just going to print like 100 copies, just go and print 100 copies
Yeah.
of it for New York Comic Con 2022. And somewhere a couple months before New York Comic Con, I had been talking to Steve at Dead Sky about doing the Western one shot, 3 Days to Death Is Here, that you read. I was talking to him about doing that, and I just mentioned that I had this one shot, and he said he wanted to take a look, and then he was like, "We'd like to publish this." So, um, it didn't. It sold out. It's great. It didn't have a huge print run, but it sold out. From the distributor, but it got a much bigger audience through them than it would have if I had printed 100 copies to try and sell at New York Comic Con.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just super, super grateful that it was able to come out. I think we're going to do a second printing at some point too. That's the other cool thing about a one shot, right? Is like you can just reprint it, and it's available to a new audience, right? It's not like a 4-issue miniseries or something where it's like,
Yeah. Yes.
oh well, we reprint number one, but we don't have enough copies of number two, and it's this whole balancing act, right? It's like, oh, we can just print 1,000 more copies or 2,000 more copies or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there's really something to be said for that, and it's a low priced item. It's I don't know. I love the format. It's they're a lot of work. I mean, it's all a lot of work. What am I
Yeah.
fucking
Well,
saying,
yeah.
right? I've written
It's
graphic novels, I've written miniseries, I've written whatever, right? Short stories, and 2-pagers, 1-pagers, one shots, whatever, right? I've written all these different lengths, 100 and I've written a 300-page graphic novel, right? Like everything, they're all hard, right? They're all difficult,
yeah.
right? So,
Just some end
um,
sooner than others.
yeah, right. So but it's all about sort of pacing, getting the
Mhm.
pacing right. For me, it always starts with like the pacing, and with a such a small number of pages, you really have to sort of figure out. It really forces you to think about what the story is. I think when you do like an ongoing or a mini series, you can kind of wing it maybe a little bit sometimes. Like, well, I don't quite know what's going to happen in this issue, but let me just start writing and see what happens. You can't do that with a one shot. Excuse
Yeah.
me. If you've only got a limited number of pages, you really got to figure it out. Now, I don't typically just wing anything. Like I really try to think everything through closely before I start writing, because I think um, that's really the way to get the best, you know, um, the best work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Although Liana and I are doing a new book together, and it's a horror book, and I am for the first time I'm winging it as I'm writing a little bit, um, but that's because it has a very very rigid format, right?
Yeah.
It's 5 44-page issues, and every
Oh,
page is 4 widescreen panels, right?
okay.
So it's very rigid, and uh, I'm winging it a little bit because it's kind of it gives a little bit of a sense of mystery for me as I'm writing in a way that I want. It's a horror book, and it's kind of like I don't want to know what's going to happen, right? I want to find out as I'm writing, right?
Yeah.
Versus everything else I ever write, it's like I know the beginning, I know the end, I know the middle, I know the second page, the 34, like I know every single page what happens before
Yeah.
I start writing, because I sit down and I meticulously, um, plot it out. And then, after each issue, I replot the rest of the book depending on what has happened, and how I change things
Mhm.
in the issue. So, I guess, I meticulously sort of plan everything. And this is one time when I'm not doing that, um, because I'm just trying to see if how it changes the story if I do that. So,
No,
um,
yeah, I'm glad you're working in that format. I'm glad you and Leon are working on something else again. I think I am very much in the camp of telling anybody, including myself, that when as a general rule, I think stories come out better when you know what the ending is before you start writing everything.
yeah,
And you know, that's not like, oh, there's no good endings that happen without, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is for the majority of people, like
mhm,
how many large pieces of media that like, you know, got like, huge followings or whatever. And then you realize like they had no idea how they're going to end this and they're just floundering and it loses all its spark and
yeah,
magic. And
right,
it's very reminiscent of music to me, where that, you know, the I forget where I picked this up from, but basically, if you're writing a song, right, you typically have like an intro to the song, and a mistake a lot of people make is writing the intro first, because what
right,
are you writing an
sure,
intro to? What are you
right,
writing an intro? What are you
yeah,
introducing? You don't know. You have no
right,
idea. You're not
right,
done yet.
exactly, yep, exactly,
So
yep,
but to flip it to like where how you're doing it is also you have enough work under your belt. You've done enough of this, and also you have that rigid format to where like you can improvise. You've
yeah,
and again, to draw it back to like music, is people who improvise on stage and stuff like that. They didn't pick up the guitar yesterday. They didn't
right,
pick up the drums yesterday. They've been
yeah,
doing this for years. They know what they're doing.
yeah,
So when they fly off the handle a little bit, they have enough experience to know when it's like, all right, I'm going too far. Let me bring it back in. Let me do this. I can't stray too
yeah,
far from here. And I feel like it's very much the same with comics, when because you've done enough. You've worked with Liana before. You guys know each other. You know, how they draw. They know how you write.
yeah,
So you have
right,
this comfort level. And then again, like you said, it's a very rigid format. So giving yourself that ability to just have that mystery and all that, I think it's a really great idea. And I think, you've definitely shown with your previous work that you've put in the thought, you've put in the time. So I feel like experimenting for yourself in this way is going to be really cool and interesting. And I'm very curious to see how, what the book is when it comes out, and,
yeah.
knowing this is kind of how you're working with it. I'm very curious to see, how that, how, if it differs at all in terms of like how things felt with your other books, if
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
it's definitely a different feel. I mean, I won't say too much, but you know, when we were as we were even doing True Cult, we were talking about, all right, well, what do we want to do next? Like we knew we wanted to keep working together. What do we want to do next? And
Mhm.
I had three or four, um, I had three or four things, that I was kind of thinking about, and I, so we sort of looked at them, and but one of them I was like, we can't do this one next. This is too much like True Cult. I don't want to
Mhm.
get I don't want us to get pigeonholed, right? As this is exactly what we do. So we did something a lot different from True Cult, right? Still be recognizable as the same art
Yeah.
team, but definitely a different tone, different feel, different vibe. But yeah, I mean, I always plotted out. I always plot out fairly meticulously, and I have snippets of dialogue as I'm plotting that I think might be good here and there, that may or may not end up getting used. But you know, I always knew when I could see the first page, and I knew exactly what happens on the first page, and I knew exactly what happened on the last page, no matter how many pages were in between them. But I always knew when I knew those two things, I was ready to start writing. So
Cool.
that's always been sort of the that's always been sort of like the signal that I sort of understand myself is like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
all right. So I'm putting something together for a work for hire, just a small work for hire thing, and I know the first page, so now I've got to just pace around and procrastinate as much as possible, and then at some point the last page is I'm gonna go, oh, now I'm ready. Now I'll
Yeah.
figure out what happens in the middle, but now I know the beginning and the end, and now I just have to figure out how to blow minds in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny to hear you say that, because I think as a fellow creative and other creatives who may be listening, that's how it works. Sometimes
Yeah,
it looks
yeah,
like it looks like you're procrastinating. It looks like you're not doing anything, but you're kind of, you're kind of almost charging up.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then once your meter hits that level, you're like, that's where it's, because I literally just had that experience. I'm currently laying out the pages for the next EV in the Helsings issue, and I was kind of stuck for a couple days. And not that, you know, the scripts I get from Steve are great. He gives me plenty of like clear intent and direction, but also plenty of rope to hang myself with.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
so it kind of became this thing like, oh, what am I going to do? And there's this one sequence in there that was kind of throwing me off, and it was a few pages past where I was currently working, but I knew that leading into that page, I wanted to have, I needed to know where I was going, you know.
yeah, yeah.
So when that finally happened to me this morning, like I was like, boom, like I laid out those 6 or 7 pages, like, not necessarily fast, but like
Right.
without like hesitation
You
on anything.
saw you saw where you were going, and you could
Yeah,
just sit down
yeah.
and do
And
it.
then I got,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then when that happens, I don't know how to explain it, but I hope, I'm hoping it's a feeling we all get. It's like you just feel like so like, yes, yes, okay.
yeah.
You're just so
Uh-huh.
excited about what you're
Yeah.
doing and what's going down
Right.
on the page, that you're just like, you don't want to stop then.
Yeah.
That becomes a whole new issue when you got to stop.
Yeah. 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 No, I
Um,
mean, yeah. I mean, that's a good thing about comics, right? Is you have to stop. Like there's a place. This is 20 pages.
yeah,
There's 22 pages. You have to stop.
yeah,
Um, but you can always sort of stretch it out. I mean, I'm writing the ninth issue of Kill More right now, and the ninth, obviously the last issue of a series. So 10 will be the last issue, but it's the last issue of a series is always the toughest one. But this ninth issue is one of the toughest things um, I've ever written. Um, just every page has to be a banger,
yeah,
um, and I'm just paralyzed. I was talking to Max Allen Fuchs, who's the artist on the book, and I was talking to him, and I was like, I'm like, I'm fucking paralyzed, man. I can't write this fucking book. Like I've written a handful of pages here and there, and I cannot write this fucking issue. Um, you know, and he was basically like, we'll just write something that sucks, and then
yeah,
you can move on and fix it, And I
mhm,
was like, yeah, I should just write something that sucks, right? So, because then at least you've got like, I know what happens on the page, right? Like I know what
mhm,
happens on the page, and it's like, I write it and I'm like, man, this is a boring ass page. But like, it doesn't have to be, but it's for now. Now I can move to the next page, right? And then you can always go
yeah,
back and figure out what are the things that can take the page can make it good, or can make it even better, or can take it to the next level, Um,
mhm,
and in that book especially, because we're putting so much into every page, um, whether it's um, sort of hidden story things in the art, whether it's allusions to other things we've seen in the book, whether it's actual fucking clues, right, for the fucking detectives that are right there on the page, we're drawing them in, right? But
yeah,
also the dialogue, the sort of, you know, where we're both, you know, we're telling a story, we're showing a relationship between people, but we also want it to be enjoyable to read and riveting. And you sort of, there's so many things in every single panel, right? Every single panel is like a fucking fight. But I think it's worth it, right? Um, but it's could definitely be a struggle to actually get it to where it's something that you feel good about, because you have such sort of high standards, or at least I do. We do have such high standards for ourselves and for the book.
Well, yeah, and you sent a few issues over of Kilmore, and I read the first couple. It's I love the premise. The art obviously is fantastic. I love the story, and yeah, it's very clear that you guys are putting your whole ass into this book, and
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
you're doing.
yeah,
You just feel it. Because even Max's artwork is awesome, and he really captures that kind of having a lot of detail, but not being cluttered or not being
yeah,
overly fussy, you
yeah.
know,
Mhm.
and and it works. And again, it works really well with the story, and this how everything's weaving in together. And so when you guys are dropping the things here and there, it's right there. You can you won't miss it, but you could just because
Yeah, yeah,
you're not going to bend over backwards to like find to try to find something or whatever, but you could easily just get lost in everything else and not notice it right
yeah.
away. And I think it's a very delicate thing to do, especially in comics, because you know something I love in recent years is there's been a definite pushback against the intense amount of detail required that
Mhm.
people were calling for people. Like, you know, as much as I love, his work and the stuff he's done, like, but not everyone is Brian Hitch.
Yeah,
Not
yeah, yeah,
everyone
yeah,
is, going to put in all of that stuff, all of that,
yeah.
and it's not necessary for everything.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
there's a great tweet that goes around. I don't know the source of it, but it's basically like, this is why comic artists don't draw a book a month anymore, and it's basically Captain America's boot.
His boot.
And
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
there's a good old
laces and the
swashbuckler boot, and the
grommets
other
and
one's
everything.
this highly
Yeah,
detailed, boot
yeah.
with sea mines and stuff and all that.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, I drew an extremely detailed boot for a cover recently. I love
Yeah,
it, but there's also times where it's like, okay, this, I'm not going to fully render this background person. There's going to be this little thing
yeah.
here.
Why not? Doesn't matter.
I'm glad to see that
Yeah,
that's becoming, that's not what's being demanded of artists and stuff anymore, because
yeah,
as much as we love telling stories, we also like living and breathing and sleeping.
yeah. Right,
And
right. Well,
you know,
when we were doing True Cult, Liana was like, I want to go back. There's some pages, there's a lot of things I want to fix, and I was like what? Because we had fixed some things as we went or whatever. I was like what? And they were like, well, this car, for instance, you can't really tell what kind of car it is or whatever. And I was like, does it have four wheels? Does it have windows, doors?
it's a fucking
Who gives
car.
a fuck? It's a car. It's all that matters is that it's a car. The reader will know it's a car. Doesn't no reason to redraw this. So
Yeah.
you can definitely get away with, like, depending on the story, right? I mean, I guess it would be absurd in like a Brian Hitch book if, like, you couldn't tell whether it was a sedan or a hatchback or something, right? Like, that would be
Well,
insane. But, like,
I mean,
in our book,
and
it doesn't matter.
that's what he cultivated. That's what he did for that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's something I've long said, and I tell, whenever for some reason some younger artist or something comes up to my table and asks me for anything, any advice or anything, and that is one, to not, to really look at original art from your
Uh-huh.
favorite artist that you admire. I
Uh-huh.
mean, and
Yeah.
I say when I say really look at, I mean zoom in on the
Yeah.
shit that you don't, that's not the flashy stuff.
Yeah.
And you're going to find things where like, oh, they didn't do all of that, or they didn't do this, or this looks a little scratchy here or whatever. But you don't notice, you don't care, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, my favorite example is I was looking at Cliff Chang pages,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
I'm looking at these windows he's doing in the background. And I'm like, oh, he's not drawing every window line. He's not drawing every cross
No.
and it's like telling myself like, you're not better than fucking Cliff Chang. You don't have to do that. If he doesn't have to do that, you certainly don't have to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, who are you trying to impress
Yeah.
with that? So,
I have 2 pages of Cliff Chang art in my basement, and
yeah,
I look at them every day. It's amazing.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
one of my favorite
it's
artists. Just incredible.
yeah, I have the all the trades of Paper Girls behind me here that I have
Mm.
not. I read the first one and a half, and I had to stop. And then, but I was picking them up. 'Cause I'm like, I know I'm gonna love this anyway. I'm just gonna pick this
Yeah,
up.
it's great. Yeah.
Like Invincible, like I have not read them yet because I know it's gonna end.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just not ready to have it end yet.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I don't know if there's like an equivalent of like that for writers. Is that kind of is there something like that where it's like, I don't have to, because I to probably
Oh
tie
man.
it up neater. A lot of the writers I work with, I've always been given, for the most part, a lot of leeway in
Yeah.
everything. There's like,
Yeah.
do whatever you want. Like, here's a at most, like, here's a
Yeah.
suggestion for the camera angle I
Right.
was thinking. Only on occasion, be like, I really had this in my head, you
Yeah.
know, for the most part. And so it is like kind of like letting go some of that stuff, kind of the same principle for writers, or is it really just a personality thing? Because I don't know if some writers were just like, no, I never really asked for that kind of stuff. I just kind of wanted the artist to do the artist thing.
Definitely a personality thing. I mean, if you look at an Alan Moore script, they're insane. And
Yeah.
it's insane that there's any artist who would ever want to work with him. That said, he's the greatest writer the medium has ever seen and probably ever will see. And pretty much everything he wrote is a goddamn masterpiece, you
Yeah.
know. So who am I? But if you look at the scripts now, it's the work of an insane person, right? Like it's wild. Um, but yeah, it's a personality thing, I think, right? Like, you have
Hmm.
like if you look at I mean, Alan Moore's massive influence on me, but Brian Azzarello is a writer I really, really admire as well. And you look at a Brian Azzarello script, there's like 9 words on the page, and an Alan Moore script
Yeah.
has 700 on the page, and they're all in all caps or whatever, right? So, um, it's definitely just everyone is different, and when you know, and I write differently on my creator own work than I write on my work for hire stuff, right? Work for hire stuff, I care less, and I don't mean care less in the sense that I don't try to do a good job. I just mean I don't own the characters. I don't have as much of a stake in it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so the way I approach the writing and the relationship with the artist is different. Also, work for hire a lot of times. You never even talk to the artist. You
Yeah.
never even
Right.
talk to them. You're never on the same email chain with them. So you just
Hmm.
see the pages when they're done, right? So,
Yeah.
so a lot of times, uh, with work for hire stuff, I just sort of write it kind of generically in a way that I want it to be clear what I'm envisioning, but I always have a note at the top saying, "Look, nothing here is set in stone. If you see a way to do something better, go for it, and I'll write around it."
Hmm.
My thing is, I just, you know, I, I will dialogue around something a writer does rather than have them redraw something, if it's at all possible. Every now and then, there's a legit mistake that affects the story, and you're like,
Hmm.
we got to fix this or whatever. But normally, if something comes in and I'm like, well, that's totally not what I thought. And you look at the script and you're like, oh, but I see how that's how they read that because I wasn't clear. Right. And I go, well, that's my fault. I'll just read dialogue. I'll make it work. Right. So I'll just
Hmm.
rework it. Um, so, there's that. And I mean, obviously, like, I write specifically for Liana. I write specifically for Max. I write specifically for Ken. Right. the artists, who I work with on work for hire stuff the most. I write specifically for them, but I write differently for each one of them, right? Like,
Yeah.
because Max is a totally different artist than Liana. So like with Max, I have a different approach. Liana has different strengths than Max, so I write to those. I write to those strengths. I'm writing to for a different artist, So, it all depends. It's all like a temperament thing, and it's a relationship thing.
No,
You know,
yeah, it's 100%, and it's. I'm glad to hear you talk about how you change your style up a bit, how you present things based on the artist, because you know I don't think people think about this, but at least for me, I know first, if I'm working with a different writer, I I personally get in kind of a different headspace because I'm thinking about the way they write and the things they
uh,
like and the things
yeah,
they really like to see, and really trying to, especially now where I'm bouncing between two different books
yeah,
that are vastly different in terms of how I do things.
yeah,
uh and one I have uh the Spend the Night book with Jackie Kong, who she's very visual,
uh,
so she likes a lot of input on the
yeah,
art and,
yeah,
and the visuals. And I don't own that book. I'm work for hire on that book, and I've come to like understand that my role in there is much more of a production role as opposed to, granted, she's given me, times to like, now that we got more comfortable with each other, she's giving me times to like spread out
yeah,
my influences on things here.
right,
But as opposed to like working with Steve on Evie and the Helsings, it's like basically he's like, just draw. Draw
yeah,
your thing. That just,
yeah,
and you know it's funny because with Steve, like he almost gives me like too few panels. Like I'm
uh,
always adding panels and things like
yeah,
that for like character beats and stuff. But I also know that that's what Steve and I love. That's what we both
yeah,
like doing. So,
yeah,
I'll be going and adding to stuff like that. But I suppose with Jackie, it's more like, you know, kind of like managing this chaos that she's writing, which
yeah,
in a complimentary way, because the story she writes is just fucking crazy or whatever. So
right,
there's all this insane stuff happening. So it's kind of like trying to contain it as opposed to like trying to expand and stuff like
sure,
that with the other one. And
yeah,
also just the whole, you mentioned like sometimes people don't even see or know who they're communicate at all with the artist of their book, which I've long understood as a fact of publisher books and stuff like that. But it's still so crazy to me that we just don't
yeah.
like,
No, it
you
sucks.
know yeah. And it, not to digress too much, but or uh but it just reminds me of the story of when Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder first started working together on Batman. And
Uh-huh.
Scott said these hyper detailed, scripts with camera angles noted and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And Greg Capullo's like, "What the fuck is this?"
yeah,
It was intentionally like doing the opposite to piss him off. And then like
yeah,
they got into like an argument before I guess they like saw eye to eye, and now they're like best buds. But it's kind
yeah.
of
I
like that
think
thing. Like,
Greg's a very specific way he wants to work, and
yeah,
um, on those that Batman run, he essentially said, "We're going to work Marvel style. You're going to give me a plot, right?"
yeah,
And um, Scott had never worked that way, right? It's tough. It's
yeah,
hard. It's
yeah.
hard, right? Unless you're Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the '60s
Mhm.
or Steve Ditko, it's hard
Yeah,
to do. And you really have to, and Pennyworth, the Pennyworth series I wrote was done in a kind of a Marvel style where I essentially, because that's how Juan wanted to work.
hmm,
Um, so I would essentially just write a paragraph at the top of the page that said, "Here's what happens on the page." So maybe like, you know, Alfred climbs a wall and sneaks into the research facility and looks around, right? But it doesn't. It's
Mm-hmm.
not panel. It's just a thing at the top, and then I would have the dialogue for the page, or what I imagined would be the dialogue for the page below it, and then obviously once the art came in, I would then actually map the dialogue to panels and rewrite it to
Yeah.
make it fit or whatever, you know. It's a lot more work for the writer that way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more rewriting that happens because the story can take some twists and turns, and you're like, oh, well, I don't even know how to, what this is. I got to figure this out, you know. So, I mean, you know, and the other thing, like, for me is on Kilmore, I'm doing all the color flats on the book, and that's a way for me to like intimately see every single panel in a way
Mm-hmm.
that you're just spending, you know, sometimes it takes 5 minutes to do a panel, sometimes it takes an hour to do a panel, right? Like depending on how
Yeah.
detailed it is. But that's a way that you just uh, really get intimately familiar with every single panel. And for me, that's really helpful because then I start seeing these little things that Max is putting in the book, and I can react to that in the scripts. And you know, so I think that's something that like I highly recommend for writers is, well, two things I recommend for writers other than, you know, writing is doing the color flats on a book. Um, because you can really see the art and you have a new appreciation for what you're asking the artist to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, when I first started learning how to do color flats, the first thing I thought was, fuck George Perez. Because all I could think was like, whoever was fucking coloring him must have wanted to fucking hang themselves, right? Like,
Yeah.
it must have been an absolutely brutal job to color him, right? Um, and but as a writer, suddenly now I'm like, now that I know I'm the one flatting it, sometimes I'm like, oh, do we need 4 panels in a crowded police precinct? Because then I think, because he's got to draw it 4 times, I got to flat it 4 times, right? So maybe it's, you know, maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
something else, you know. So that would be one thing, and the other thing is to um, learn to letter, not because you're trying to take a job away from a letter or anything, but just because it really
Yeah.
helps you understand how to script, and it just helps you understand the hell you put letterers through. So like learning those two things, right? More than anything
Mm-hmm.
is a way to understand what your collaborators are doing and what they're going through. And like when you send them a script and you're like, oh, oh, I'm an asshole, right? You're like, oh, I get it now. Okay, okay, right? Like
Um,
it's a real self
yeah.
awareness moment, you know?
Yeah. I think it's good for any artist and writer across the board to at least once do everything.
Yeah,
Do everything.
yeah,
Because I just had this conversation with, or a message back and forth with somebody about like, they're like, yeah, I know, I understand, like, artists have, so much more work in the process, and I'm like, yeah, I guess time wise, sure, but like writers deal with so much shit that I would rather not deal with myself. So we both have our creative crosses to bear. It's definitely
yeah,
something where it's like, um once you've done it all, because with my very first book, Pax of Low Country, I lettered the first issue. I have an immense respect for letterers. I like
absolutely.
lettering. Lettering is actually very fun. I like doing it. I wouldn't say I'm great at it. I don't think I'm terrible at it, but it's fun. I like it, but it's not more fun than drawing the book.
Yeah,
So, I will always have, unless I need to, I won't do it.
yeah,
Flatting, I absolutely despise flatting. I have
yeah,
immense respect for anyone who flats out of, you know, m- just in general. It is so mind numbing. And
yeah,
I've talked to people who are like, oh, you get into a groove with it and it becomes kind of like a meditation. I'm like, not for
yeah,
me, man. It
yeah,
is just, it's like I can feel my skin crawling when I'm doing it.
yeah.
It is
It's
so,
brutal.
and my flats suck. I'm
Yeah,
surprised, like, I'm, if I showed a real flatter my flats, they'd be like, "What is this?" I'm like, they've been printing fine. I'm just gonna leave them alone. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
coloring, coloring is another thing that I'm not gonna say I'm great at all. I think I've gotten I've got a certain like level of competency with it,
Right.
but in terms of like professional level, like I wouldn't hold the candles to some of these people.
Yeah.
The length of time it would take me to like color something. It probably takes me longer to color something than it takes me to draw it. I'll put it
Yeah.
that way.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
because
I can see that. Yeah.
yeah, because I'm
I
just
can
like I
totally
don't.
see that because
Yeah.
then as the artist, now you're trying to use the color to patch over or mask or cover up what you
Mhm.
see as shortcomings in the art, right? You're like, oh well,
Yeah.
maybe if this is shadowed more, whatever. Like I can add some shadow, I
Yeah.
can add a gradient, whatever. You then
Yeah.
you're sort of thinking
You're
about,
still you're still fucking with it. It's like,
yep,
no, you need
exactly,
to come
yep,
with a different approach of like you're finishing it. You're just
right,
and um and also like the way I like to color doesn't always work with the way I like to draw, you know?
yeah, sure,
And the way I like to color, like I like to use like a lot of like flatter colors and
yeah,
just do like subtle, more subtle
yeah,
things. And then like I like to put a lot of textures over things. Like
yeah,
um, I have this backlog of like just like textures I made when I had like all my traditional tools out that I scanned in and stuff, and
yeah,
then or like old papers and stuff, and I'll put those on things. And I kind of like doing that, but for my particular art style, it doesn't always work. It seems kind of like so it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I can color myself, but it's probably not always the best idea.
yeah,
But again,
yeah. And
but it gives
I
me,
think
yeah,
honestly, I think with very few exceptions, artists are usually the worst people to color their own work,
yeah, yeah.
with
And,
very
and
few
especially since
exceptions.
I have, now with the two books I'm on, like I have two very different colorists coloring my work. One is
Yeah,
incredibly rendered with lots of details and adding a lot of shadows and stuff because I don't put as much heavy blacks on the Spend the Night book as I normally would, you know, and it's very rendered and it looks good, but it's also like incredibly different than what colorist Jason Millay does on Evie and the Helsings, where he colors like almost very subtly, like it's not flat
uh,
at all, but it's very
yeah,
subtle when he does add like stuff, and then when he does go over rendery or whatever, or not over, when he does render more and stuff, he goes for like the vibe,
yeah,
and there's one
yeah,
image in the first issue where we're first introduced to Evie and the band, and in my head I'm thinking like, okay, it's this shot of the band, it's going to be rendered, it's going to have all this lighting coming down or whatever. Then I get the pages back from Jason, and it's just a wash in this like purple and some subtle
yeah,
shadows and stuff and all that, and I fucking loved it. And
yeah.
I'm like, oh my god, this is so much better than I
Right.
would have like I would have screwed this
Yep.
up because he caught
Oh
the
yeah.
vibe and live on stage
Yep.
better than I did when I was when I was thinking about it in my head. So you know, and again, it gives me immense respect for colorists because you can
Yeah.
you know do something and it is just like art. I saw someone uh tweet or skeet or whatever it is Blue Sky does. I don't know. I think it was on Blue Sky. But they're basically saying that colorists these days are basically what inkers were in the 80s.
Yeah.
They have that much control over the art,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
I fully agree.
Yep. Totally.
Especially with some particular art styles where the art is very open, art is very,
Uh-huh.
there's no indications of shadows or light sources, which is
Right.
fine, you know. Uh, but that art, that color is definitely, pulling some weight on there and all that.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
and this is again a long way around to saying, if you're gonna make comics, try to do everything once. You have a lot more
Yeah.
respect. And artists,
Yeah.
yeah, including writing.
I've done stories. I wrote it, drew it, colored it,
Yeah,
lettered it, and it's a very humbling experience for sure,
yeah, it is, and but it's also like I think it's incredibly important just in terms of just getting not that people are disrespectful as a whole, but like it gives you a better understanding of what you're asking people to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yep.
and fellow artists, when I say write your own book, write something, I don't mean like draw it in layout format, writing it like we like to
Right.
do. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
sit down with a blank screen, blank piece of paper, and
Right.
write. Panel one,
Right.
page one. Do it
Right.
that way because you will have like you'll have so much more appreciation for everything. Um, I won't keep you on too much longer as I yap around, but because my coffee's kicking in and I don't, I feel my second gears kicking in. But Kilmore, you mentioned we can kind of talk about it a bit. It initially came out a little bit from IDW, but now we're changing gears. You guys are getting ready for another release, new publisher and all that. You can't talk about that yet. I get it. But is there, this episode's dropping in roughly a week or so. So it'll be, mid to late January. Is there some news we should be expecting, hearing about when we're going to see more of that or have it, kick back in?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, nothing. There hasn't been anything online, so you can do the big reveal here, I guess. But yeah, we're
Well, I'm
Kilmore's
sorry
not going
about
to
that.
be complete. No, no, dude, it's all good. Kilmore's not going to be completed through IDW. Um, we're gonna finish the book with another publisher, which we're uh we're wrapping up the negotiations now to just figure out the all the legalese. Um, but yeah, we're super excited that the book is gonna come out as intended.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which to me is the most important thing is not ever compromising your vision as an artist, right? Or a writer or whatever you're doing, no fucking compromise, right? Like
Yeah.
the way I see it, my first published comic came out a month before I turned 40, right? So late fucking start, right? And my first creator owned book didn't come out till I was like 45. So fucking late start, right? So the way I see it, I don't know how many as a guy who has a full time day job, a guy who has a family, you know, and obviously I've got other fucking interests, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to make comics every fucking free second I have, even with that limited amount of time, like I think how many creator owned books am I going to get to do in my career, right? Like, let's say it, and look, any number above zero is fucking lucky, right? So the
Yeah.
fact that
Yeah.
I've got True Cult done under my belt, that I did The Left Hand Path, 3 Days to Death is here, and now doing Killmore, doing another book with Liana, um, maybe another couple things, hopefully somewhere down the line, right? Like, um, you know, thinking about how many I'll have time to do, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
an unlimited amount. So from my perspective, every single one of them has to be fucking bulletproof, right? Fucking bulletproof. No bullshit. No compromise. Like this is the work. This is like sorry, I should have shut the door. You know, this is this is my legacy, right? This is what I
Yeah.
leave behind, right? Not that I'm planning to die anytime soon, or that I don't mean it to sound like that, but like
No,
this
I
is
get it. I get
this is what I leave behind. This is going to be the mark I leave. Is going to be these 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever books, right? Because nobody's going to care about the fucking Star Trek story I wrote or this Batman stories I've written. Like for the most part, nobody's going to give a shit about Pennyworth or
it.
fucking
Mhm.
Shadow Man or whatever else I've done, right? Um, like nobody cares about those. This is what I'll be remembered for, right? Um, and my thing is I'm not going to fucking compromise for anybody. The book has to come out the way the book is supposed to come out and be what the book is supposed to be, you know. And I think my days of, I think I'm in a lucky position where, you know, when you first start, you know, breaking into comics or trying to get into comics, because you never really break in, you're just constantly trying to stay afloat, you know, and maybe somebody will read your book, you know. Um, but when you first get into comics, or at least for me, you basically say yes to everything that's offered to you, right?
Yeah.
Every job that comes your way, you say yes to. And a lot of those jobs, you're saying yes, even though you know they're fucking dumb. It won't be good. Nobody will read it. It won't get you any new fans. It won't get you any new readers, right? But you do it because you love comics and you think, I'm saying yes to a job. It's a comic. This is what I want to do. I have to do this, right? Um, and, you know, I think I'm at the point now where I don't have to say yes to those jobs anymore, right? Like, if something comes my way and somebody's like, you know, I don't know, somebody says, "Oh man, we're rebooting Mad Balls." You're the guy to write the fucking book, right? I can say,
Mm-hmm.
nah, call a different writer. Give it to somebody else. And they could maybe there's somebody out there who write a fucking amazing Mad Balls book. I don't know, but it ain't me,
I'm
right?
laughing because my buddy Ryan Lee, amazing artist, fucking loves Mad Balls. That would be like a dream
Yeah, right.
project.
So there's the thing, right? There's
So we
always going to
better
be
call
somebody
Ryan.
who's
Yeah.
there. You go, call him, let him do it. You know, and it's not that I look down on the person who's going to write the Mad Balls book. Not at all. Like I
No,
don't
no,
look.
I know what you
It's
mean
just
though.
a matter, like, because I know, right? Like, you know, like, okay, so like I don't know, like I've written Batman, right? And the most fucking, and this is back when Twitter was actually a useful, functional, cool
Mm-hmm.
fucking thing. But when the Batman story I did with John Paul Leon was announced, I got something like 200 Twitter followers in a week based on two fucking images that
Yeah.
we were posting from the story, right? Which is insane, right? And you know, I would say approximately zero of those people converted to like fans of mine specifically, right? They were either John Paul Leon fans, they were Batman fans, or they were DC fans or whatever, right? So, you know, you have to have like a long, sustained run on a big property or a bunch of properties to build an audience who will come over for your creator owned work, right? But for
Mm-hmm.
me, like, I just want to do the creator owned stuff, you know? So, you know, I don't know. It's, you know, it's this tough thing where like we're just begging people to buy our books and you're desperate to find an audience. And I don't know. I just feel like I know books aren't just like, for the most part, they're not just going to like somehow find some big audience just because they're out there and they're really good. Because there's plenty of great
Yeah.
books that nobody fucking reads, you know? Um, but I think for me, just spending my energy on things I own and that I care deeply about, you know, um, and what that involves is just not compromising what it is you want to do, you know. Um, so I think that's sort of the fucking vibe for 2024, you know.
Yeah.
Just fucking making sick shit, and you know, you own the book, do what you want,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm right there with you. You know, I'm 41, going to be 42 later this year, and you know, I got a late start, so to speak, in comics. You know, I didn't start drawing again seriously until like I was 30. You
Yeah,
know, and you know, though it's been brought to my attention, it's been 10 years since I started drawing my first real book,
yeah,
Pax of the Low Country. Like in that 10 years, it was just like I had so many like, you know, changes of like, what does this mean to me? What is this? You know?
uh-huh.
And right now, I'm on, and I have been for a while, is that again, I'm 41. I have 2 kids. I have, responsibilities. I have a family, and though I love a lot of these characters, would I love to draw a Wolverine story or a Star
Yeah.
Trek story or something like that? Sure, that'd be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you told me, like, Don, you can draw one of those things, or you can make your own book
Yeah.
and have, maybe not as many people read it, but people are going to read it. Some people are going to enjoy it. I'm going to do that,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
I think about
Absolutely.
now is the time I'm spending after everyone's asleep, before everyone's awake, during the day. What's more important to me? And I have stories I want to tell. I don't know how many of these stories I'm going to get done. We're never going. No creative is ever going to get all the work they want done. We're going to
Yeah.
die at our typewriters, at our tables, at our studios.
Yeah. Yeah.
Figuratively, or literally, or But so for me, it's like I need to figure out how to do these, and then so like Evie and the Helsings, that's a book that, you know, for whenever I'm past or whatever, I want my kids to be able to pick up that book and read it and be like, yeah, this was dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
dad's
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
and some of these one shots I'm thinking of, and all these other stories. So I totally feel what you're saying right now. It's just like, and I think that's kind of almost the industry now for a lot of people, is like publishing great because you can get some, at least at the very least, not even so much anymore, but there's some sort of like, at least I'll get a little bit of money, maybe get, one or 3 or 4 people who will buy my next book just out of
Yeah.
curiosity, maybe.
Right.
Um, but as a whole, it's just people wanting to tell their stories. And I think that's amazing.
Hmm.
And, you know, Kickstarter's been weird lately. Like, I know a lot of people are having issues with Kickstarter and all these other crowdfunders. Not because I feel like in the pandemic, like when True Call came out, it was like everyone was like kind of like kicking Kickstart into like high gear.
Yeah.
Single issue books were, issue ones of books and series were like, it became a viable solution for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We're doing that with Evie and the Helsings now. But even now, we're talking about like we have 2 more issues we have to kickstart for this volume. Even now, we're talking about for the second volume, we might just go straight to trade.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
might just and just because it's getting tough out there, and it goes back to the earlier thing you said, having the completed thing.
Yeah.
Here it is. I
Yep.
think in the end, we always wanted to have, you know, Evie and the Helsings be a trade to start off with.
Yeah.
But Steve had kind of developed a kind of a how I put it, kind of like he had it down because he was doing single issue stuff with
Right.
Kickstarter. So he's like, I got this
Yeah.
kind of machine going for this. Let's just do this. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. Um, and if anything, that made sure so we did the book as opposed to
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
endlessly
Right.
going away.
Yeah.
But to speak to what you said, like it's yeah, to have the finished thing, like feels more the point than like let's get it funded. And that's a very lucky privileged stance we can take, Steve and I.
Yeah.
Uh that I know a lot of people can't. A lot of people have to do Kickstarters and stuff to get money to be paid to pay their bills and do these things, you know, and my art income isn't as necessary as that. um, though in the way this world is going, it's becoming more and more necessary with things. But anyway, to circle back, yeah, I'm glad you have that mentality because one, I really enjoy your books. I really enjoy the stories you're writing, and I just want more of them. So I
Yeah. Thank
respect
you.
and appreciate your stance for yourself. You know, it's your stories. You're taking control. You want to do them the way you want to do them, get them out the way you want them. And that's awesome. And, I
Yeah.
think it's definitely something that, I hope a lot of people take to heart for themselves And I think that's kind of the feeling that's going on, because there's been too many of these small publishers going belly up, and then people's books getting tied up in like weird legal things because of it. And yeah, I think we need to take it back and all that. So
yeah, that's the thing. It's all about control and ownership and making sure that it's that it isn't caught up in something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So before I start, going off into another tangent somewhere else, Scott, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It was a blast talking to you. I'm looking forward to getting Dungeon Synth recommendations for you. I'm looking forward to reading, the rest of Kilmore when it comes out. And now is the time to let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, Instagram is probably the best place. Scott.Bryan.Wilson, which is my new account after Instagram deleted my old one with no fucking explanation. Fuck Instagram. I'm also on X, Twitter, fucking bullshit, but I never use it. It's fucking worthless now. But I'm on there. It's Scott B.R. Wilson. Totally worthless now. Absolutely worthless. And then I'm on Blue Sky. Scott, I think it's Scott Bryan Wilson at .bsky or .social or whatever. Anyway, you type in my name, I'm on there.
I'll make sure there's links to all that in the show notes below. And if as things develop with Kilmore and all that, I'll make sure to share those as well. Scott, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Okay.